Hello, everybody. I'm Janine Turner. Welcome to Northern Disclosure, where my fabulous co-host, Rob Morrow, and I walk through the episode and talk about the stories behind it and reminisce about the good old days with a really amazing show. Once again, the news was so depressing, and I thought, I don't even want to listen to this. I thought, I know, I'll go watch Northern Exposure. And it made me so happy. Rob Morrow, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Janine. How you doing today?
I'm fine. I'm just fine.
I get your point. You know, the show is a kind of salve, for the hard times, and it definitely takes us to another place. And you know what I was thinking about, Janine? Sometimes there's aspects of the shows that are not my favorite. There's parts of stuff that I don't, either it's something I've done or the writing or the directing or something that I don't, but almost every single time by the end of the show, I am completely transported and moved. And in this particular episode, that ending, I felt so inspired, and moved. And I think the show has this amazing way of pulling it together at the end, and in this one, I really felt that.
With a wonderful sense of intellect, philosophy, intellectual, stimulation, quirk, romance, I happen to love this episode, by the way, is The Body in Question. It was written by Henry Brommel, who was a fabulous writer, went on to win all kinds of awards and work. They stole him away to I'll Fly Away, which was always a little resentful of those type of things. But he was one of our story editors, but also one of our top-notch writers. And it was directed by David Carson. And our guest today, by the way, is John Vreeke, who associate producer, but also was in charge of the extras on the set and the background actions. And that was pivotal aspect of the show. Talk about collaboration and painting on a painting to bring it all to fruition. But Rob, I thought, first of all, your performance in this show was excellent. You had quite the arc. And I wanted to go down into the nitty gritty of the show a little bit. I thought this show was so profound. And I have all these lines about it that I do want to share some of them because of I thought the writing was profound, and your acting and the arc at the end. And at the end, when the ending, when Ezekiel came and all of that, but at the end, when you and I had that little moment, and then you smiled, and you
mean Elijah, right?
Yeah, what I say, Ezekiel or Elijah,
Yeah.
Right? Elijah came. Thank you. But at the end, you and I had this moment, and you smiled and had this kind of electricity. And I thought, there's really nothing better than when Rob smiles and brings on the kind of charm. But it was also an arc of settlement, I think, for what your character so your character traversed such a wide variety of emotions, but we all did, and I have specific memories of this. The show was philosophical and talked about the things I love. I love philosophy, history, and do you change history? And there are lines here. The truth. This came from John Corbett, who I thought looked like he was right out of France the whole time.
He did. He looked great.
We might need to read. You want to read about the show before I start talking more about it?
Johnny's such a star, You just look at him and it's like.
Well, they had him dressed. They had him dressed in that kind of open collar thing. I think they worked it. They made him look like right out of Les Mis.
Absolutely. I'm sure. Okay, so here's a synopsis. The audience likes this. And by the way, if you are listening to us, you can also, and you want to watch us, you can on the Northern Disclosure YouTube channel, and hit subscribe, because that lets us know you're paying attention. We love getting all your notes and responses to the episodes. It means a lot to us. But here's the synopsis. While fishing on No Name Fork, Chris stumbles across a human body frozen into a block of ice. He retrieves it along with the man's presumed belongings, his boots, his hat, his watch, and his diary, the latter revealing him to be of French descent and containing evidence that Napoleon was not at Waterloo, but rather in Alaska with his companion, Pierre, who had been frozen for 176 years. While Pierre is stored in Holling's walk-in freezer, he causes disturbances in town. Joel starts thinking about history. Maurice dreams of a new business scheme. Holling curses his genetic background, and Shelley worries about fertility. Because Maurice is busy trying to make money off of Pierre, Ed takes a job at Ruth Ann's store, and she helps him through an artistic crisis. He's sent his film script to someone in Hollywood for evaluation. It comes back rejected, and Ed feels dejected. But through Ruth Ann's telling about her own sons, he regains his confidence. In the end, some Indians steal Pierre out of the walk-in, smashing Maurice's latest scheme.
Beautiful scene at the end with the music coming up, and they're off in the canoe, and then Marilyn is there watching it secretly in the trees. That was also awesome. But I want to go through some of these lines because I think as I do, first of all, the Ruth Ann and Ed Chigliak moments were terrific. But he goes, would you like some coffee? I have instant coffees of the world, which I just thought was really sweet. But I didn't know. It's really kind of fun, too, that Maggie threw out that she spent a year at the Sorbonne in France. I'm
I
like,
love
oh,
hearing that. Wait, that's
uh-huh.
interesting. Like,
Yeah.
so is that the only time it's referenced that you were at the Sorbonne?
That I can remember.
Right.
Um, that
Which
I could
again, it's
remember.
these contradictions in the characters, which these little revelations. Also, Holling, there's a lot of revelations. There's Joel,
Hmm.
that Joel's family was from Poland. That Holling, was of a blue blood of French descent. These aspects that we don't know that we keep hearing about these characters.
Oh yeah, and that scene, we're jumping around here a little bit, but that scene, David Carson directed it, and I loved his directing because you got wide shots, but you got these amazing close-ups. And I like both. I like all types of shots, but I always like to make sure there are close-ups. And I didn't really get any because your actors are always looking at this until the end, which was an interesting choice. And it works actually, but that scene with Holling that you have, where he is revealing to you that he was from French aristocracy and he's so ashamed about the whole thing, just simply played with over the shoulders shots and close ups. That's one of the rarely does that happen. We're always moving, walking, talking, cooking, lifting, doing. And that it's one of the rare moments that I remember for a scene that long where you were actually did you catch y'all were just close-ups on your faces, and boy was John Cullum once again amazing in the deliverance. Like she's just like right off the theater, and the things that were said there. And Rob, my favorite close-ups of you were with Elijah. And I loved that no one else could see him, but you could. There you go with that mysticism again. But your eyes, and once again, those were close-ups that just played in close-ups. There was nobody walked around, just stood right there. And sometimes I think that plays beautifully in the midst of all the action. And I think a lot of times we were just always in action, and we didn't have a lot of time for those delicious close-ups. But those close-ups on you with Elijah, your eyes were just like doughy and big, and you were relaxed, and it was simple, and yet it was so profound. You had a real innocence and eagerness about you in that scene.
Thank you. I mean, I really like David Carson as a director. I remember responding to him right away, and I wished he had done more. I think he had done 3 episodes, but he was very specific. He was from England. I think he was from the theater. And he just could really talk the talk as well as create these environments. As you said, it was the blocking wasn't contrived. It was innate to the scenes. It served the scenes, and he had a great touch. And I also just want to point out that it's the first time I think we have a real we get Ruth Ann's backstory, and she her character steps out of the store and becomes, we start to see her, and she really emerges as a real integral part of the town.
Yeah, it did. Yeah, I really loved that they would just let the camera rest on those kind of and the scenes. The level of dialogue, which I do want to read some of this. The dialogue was so rich and so complicated. I have one of John Cullum's Holling's lines here, and I felt for you, Rob, knowing how you struggled, with all the having to say all these terms and whatnot. And okay, so here's some of the lines I like. Right. Um, I love the line "rain on your cadaver." I thought that was really funny. That was in there somewhere. I'm not even exactly sure. He talks about you're from New York. Maurice does, and he says the innate with you're a New Yorker with innate skepticism, natural sense of supremacy, of superiority in the way of the world. I thought that was funny. Another line was the most crucial piece of equipment in any mission is the man in charge. I thought that was a profound line. The whole question about whether
we could substitute man or woman.
yeah, of course, it's used generically, right? Was Napoleon really at Waterloo? It's just a great concept. Um, I love if you can't count on history, where does it end? This was your dialogue, Rob. Did Washington cross the Delaware? Did Joshua never fight the Battle of Jericho? And so it talks about that. And then the end of the line was, it's like opening a trap door to oblivion. It's just a great line. Well, like opening the trap door to oblivion. Very, very poetic.
It's really it explores the stories we tell ourselves, and I mean, they say that history is written by the victors. It's not always fact, which is, that's the kind of dialectic argument that in the church between Chris and Joel, they talk about what's fact and what's truth and what's the difference. And I think that's what the show explores a little bit, and also about ancestry and what we carry through us. That's a big theme in the show.
There's a line there.
Yeah, he said that we are just our genes, and that this information that we carry from history comes through us, gets expressed, in who we are. And those are profound, as you said. It was profound. Those are the profound ideas at the crux of this particular story.
I have that line of John Cullum's. Very tricky line to say, by the way, which he did masterfully, of course. We are all just genes, Joel. Think about just genes, Joel. Those 3 J's, the alliteration. We are all just genes, Joel.
Right, because he felt that he was, a victim of his gene pool, and that that if he needed to deny it, otherwise he can carry on in some of the horrible things that his ancestors did. So he was in denial about it, which he has to kind of reconcile. That's his story in the episode.
Yes, and then I just want to read 3 more, Robin. I'm finished. Maggie has a great line to Fleischman when you're in angst. She says, you come here with a limited grasp of the world. What's wrong with doing that? Oh, what's wrong with doing that? No, challenging that? Something like that. It was a good line. In other words, you come here with a limited, what's wrong with losing that? I guess it's not really losing, but maybe that's what it says. And then at the end, with the great monologues that I figured you probably wrote some of this down that John Corbett, Chris in the Morning was doing. The truth twists and turns. The facts remain the same.
There you go.
Truth is beauty. Beauty is truth. So it would. I don't know. I couldn't get enough of this show. I thought it was.
Well, he reads from Proust at the end, which is as deep into memory as you can get. Proust writes with such endless detail about the past. It's from a book called Remembrance of Things Past. And talk about profound. It says it's really profound about memory. The show brings up a lot of cool ideas, and that's one, and it brings them together in a way. I like the way it comes full circle, and that Pierre is returned to where he belongs. So I want to talk about so John Vreeke, aside from being just a great guy, was instrumental in, as Janine said, painting the canvas that was Northern Exposure. He was responsible for all the background players, the quote extras, which there are numerous, and they define the landscape of the show. And sometimes they're unsung, and sometimes they get their moments. But I remember how hard he worked. He would have to go out and find people and get and it really enriched our show. And he did such a good job and was so beloved by everyone in the company that eventually Rob Thompson, one of the executive producers, made him an associate producer. And then he went on after the show to direct a lot of theater in DC. He was at the Woolly Mammoth Theater Company and the Mosaic Theater Company, and did a lot of new works, and was a real important presence in the DC theater scene. And now he lives back in Seattle, where he was when we were doing the show. And I think without further ado, we're going to bring him out.
John!
Hey, hey, Janine. Hey, Rob.
John, it's so good to see you. Thanks for coming and hanging out with us.
Well, thanks to you guys. I got to tell you something. For 30 years, I mean, I didn't think much about Northern Exposure. For 5 years, we worked and worked and worked, and that was our lives. And then suddenly it was done, and then we went on with our lives in all sorts of different directions. And then, and so I didn't think about it that much. Oh, every once in a while, I was always proud of it. People say, well, what's on your resume? What did you do? Well, I used to work on Northern Exposure. And now you say that to kids and they go, oh, yeah, my grandparents used to watch that. I'm just amazed by this, but I had no idea until you got a hold of me at the beginning of this week, Janine, and I go, what the hell is all this about? And so I go on YouTube and I see these. I watched the whole interview you did with Rob Thompson, because Rob and I were good buddies. And then I watched the one with Josh Brand, because that was very informative for me. I didn't know so much. And Josh is, man, what a smart man. And by the way, he and I are exactly the same age. I may be like 1 year older than Josh is. And I watched the one with Cynthia, and I particularly watched the one with Elaine, because I wonder if my memory of how she got cast in the show lines up with hers, because I thought, I'll bet you they're going to ask her about that.
Did it line up?
Yeah, yeah. Well, my timeline's a little bit different, but memory is weird. But yes, it lined up. She was sitting in the lobby, having delivered her mother to Patty Callis's office to put her on tape, and Patty was in the back working with Armenia, just having her recite some lines, and I was.
Patty was the local Seattle casting director,
Yeah,
Patty
Patty
Callis.
did. Patty was responsible, for hiring somebody to do the extras. She hired me to do the extras and to be a stand-in, by the way. So those first 8 episodes, I was running around trying to get people for the shows. And on days there were no extras, I was one of the stand-ins.
Oh, I don't remember that. Who were you standing in for? Anyone in
Well, I
particular?
was the utility stand-in, because we had a stand-in for you, we had a stand-in for Maggie, and then we needed a third stand-in.
Most audience will know this, but just in case they don't, a stand-in is someone who, because when they're doing the lighting, sometimes it's a lot of time. It takes a lot of time, and the actors have to kind of conserve their energy or take a minute to kind of get focused. And so they bring in someone who has the same kind of coloring and size, and they stand in as they set up the shots.
Right. Yeah. And so I just want to express. So I went down this rabbit hole. I started watching these episodes. I watched this body in question. I had to watch it twice, because the first time through, I'm going, whoa, I missed so much. And my big question for you guys is, do you think 2025 television audiences get this kind of rich, in-depth stuff? Or do you think it would even work today?
Well, one of the things about the show is that it can appeal to all kind of levels of intellect, if you will. You don't have to be a historian or a philosopher or a poet to understand the universal aspects of the themes of the show. And I think that's why ultimately it was successful back when it first aired, and why it continues to be, because it can appeal to different frames of reference. You know what I mean?
It appeals to the heart, the soul, right? And the mind. And so whether you're looking for an intellectual stimulation, if you're looking for kind of a wisdom, sort of religious, kind of theological, that's there. Or if you just want to listen with emotionally with your heart, and how the characters feel.
Or humor, and it makes you laugh.
And then there's the sexuality there. I just think anyone, they can pick and choose sort of whatever they want to do.
I want to just say something before we jump in about John. John was so important for an aspect of my career that I don't know if a lot of people know about. But this week, we tape this show sometimes about a month in advance. But this week, the great Robert Redford passed on September 16th,
I was
and
thinking about you, Rob.
and John, when I was asked to audition for that movie quiz show, I did this movie that Robert Redford directed, and he became a mentor for me. And when I was asked to audition, I couldn't because I was shooting the show, and they asked me to go on tape, which is now kind of the norm of how actors audition. But back then, it wasn't. And I didn't know how to do it. I went to John Vreeke and I said, "Can you help me?" And we put together a camera in the conference room and of the studio. And John taped and read with me, and I ended up getting the part. And I
Ah,
just wanted to say, that changed my life and still reverberates in my life. So
yeah. I'm
thank
not
you for
seeing any
doing that.
residuals, but good. I'm glad. But this show, when I watched it, yeah, at first I thought, wow, you just got to use your brains to keep up with what's going on here. By the time you get to Joel's dream, he's fallen asleep in the freezer, and his great grandparents come in, this ultra orthodox Jewish family, and then who is it? Isaiah?
Elijah.
Okay, we've said Ezekiel, Elijah, and
Clearly, we're not dealing with any Jews except for me.
Yeah, right. No Jews here except. But what I want to say is that what you're saying about the multi how the show can appeal to so many different layers of people, and within individuals, the emotional, the intellect. I was completely captivated by it, and I was there when it was made, but it was so long ago that I almost completely forgot about it. The first scene and the last scene were really second unit scenes where it was just me, uh, David, and Jim Charleston was the AD on that, and we brought John out, and then in the end we brought Elaine out and the three Native Americans in the canoe, and you talked about David Carson. I I remember David being one of the older directors that came in. And I was there for all 110 episodes, so I met all these directors, and I found David to be more laid back, more easy to get along with, and didn't take himself quite as seriously. He and Jim Charleston used to joke about everything, and it always kept a bit of a lighter touch. I don't know if that was your experience, but that was mine.
It was just a very calm. There was no histrionics. It was just a kind of calm presence.
you can see that, I think, as we've been talking about in the show. I think a lot of times directors come in and they want to prove themselves. They want to do something really extraordinary and different, or they just want to be more modern about it. And these the way these close-ups were punched in at very pivotal times of the storyline, just the way Rob and Elijah stood there in the forefront with the family in the background, and they just stood there. That's sort of an old fashioned form of filmmaking, and since he was older, that's probably why it was a little bit like that, which quite frankly I like. But that just goes to show there's something to be said for wisdom and age. As I get
There we
older,
go.
that's convenient.
Yeah,
We'll tell ourselves. You can call me and tell me that every once in a while, Janine.
yeah. Yeah. So, I have so many thoughts. When we started out, and because I developed the background, I had to hire all these extras, and Josh and John came to me and said, we're in Seattle. One of the advantages of being in Seattle is that we can get a much more complex set of extras, not from central casting. Do not hire wannabe actors. We're not interested. 50% of the background needs to be Native American. 50% needs to be, guys who work in the logging industry. So not only did we went to reservations. Elaine Miles was instrumental in introducing me to some of her acquaintances in Pendleton. They came from as far as Pendleton, Oregon, and Yakima, Washington, to be
Right.
extras when we needed extras in Roslyn. So we had this incredible mixture. We also had a very small group, I would say 4 or 5, that were kind of regulars that were homeless people in Seattle.
I didn't know that.
Really?
Yeah,
Wow.
well, we didn't tell people that, but Ross always I said, okay, go pick them up, bring them in, because we given them $50 a day. We're feeding them as much food as they want, and it was always good food. The caterers were great, and they took ownership, and that's what separates out, I think, the Northern Exposure background from most shows.
Wait, so whose idea was it to do to get homeless people? Yours?
Oh, probably. I don't remember. I guess I must have just met somebody who knew somebody, and I would always say, "Oh, okay, you want to be on the show? Can you send me a Polaroid picture of yourself?" Because it was all visual. Um, uh, and every once in a while we had to send somebody home early because maybe they had been drinking or something. So it wasn't always perfect, but it 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 created an atmosphere with the Native Americans and all these small town folks from upper the coastal areas of Washington State, of owning the show. They were very, very proud of it.
Yeah, and their faces were so great. And I think when we talked about that episode where Ed made the short film, which episode was that, Janine?
Animals are us. Animals are
Animals
us.
Are Us. And at the end of it, he has that film, and he cuts to all these people in the people inhabitants of Sicily that were faces that I'd never seen. They weren't even regulars in our extras pool, and yet they were so distinct, and it just the beauty of the face, of it was captured, and how much a story is told in someone's lines and their face. They were just always great wherever you looked on the show. There was something interesting going on.
The town halls, which I love, the community gets together in the town halls. We had one in this particular episode, which was it was just magnificent. Everybody standing up and giving a little sort of Patrick Henry speech, and and the turns of people's minds. It was, I remember, before we get to the characters in the room that you cast, I remember sitting there thinking, this is a big jump for Maggie, right? Who the whole time was like, let's just go with it. It's so interesting. Why can't you open up, Rob Fleischman? Why do you bring all plug it? Why do you bring all these, regular, you're not willing to be open-minded type of thing. And then, so she's sitting there, and then on like a dime, I stand up and I say, yeah, maybe we shouldn't. Whereas, but there was a wide shot where you did I tried to play it a little bit. You could see maybe my mind thinking about it before I stood up, but everybody in the course of the show sort of had a kind of an arc of their feeling about the entire thing. But the way everybody stands up at those town halls, and Rob, you stood up at the end, and everybody, and then of course you've got Maurice there saying incredibly, stark things. And Rob, earlier in the show, there was was it in that? He goes, well, we have a Jewish doctor. And it was just like so stark. But then you cut to the beautiful heritage of the Poland Jewish family and the great grandfather of Fleischmann's and all that. So it was sort of setting it up in a way, kind of emphasizing, teeing it up. But the people that you had, talk to us about the people that you cast, and what in that room. It was very full. I mean, what do we have, like 50 people in there? And what was that like to direct those people at the time?
Well, you're dealing with people who, first off, probably never even thought about being extras on anything. I remember going to a number of reservations up in Marysville, which is just north of here. And there was a reservation, and I had set up an appointment to meet the elders and anybody else who wanted to come in. And here's this white guy who comes in and talks to a crowd of Native Americans saying, okay, we're making this show called Northern Exposure. And they said, right, they were very skeptical, very. They said, going to make fun of the Indians, cowboys and Indians, going to make fun of us, are you? And I said, well, from what I've read, because we hadn't even started yet, what I've read, no, it actually is going to turn out to portray the Native Americans in a very, very positive light. And I think that's true. I think Northern Exposure was one of the first shows that did that. And you get $50 a day. You get the $50 for waiting. You do the acting for free.
Was it that much, John? Why do I think it was $30?
It's 50.
It was 50. Okay.
This is 50, yeah, yeah. And if an extra got a little feature, they usually bumped it up to 100. But so you asked me how that works. So they would come into the extras room, and I would do a quick, So being an extra, you like for instance, if you're in the background in the brick, you can't really make any noise, and yet you've got to be animated. You've got to look like you're having a conversation with your friend, like you're eating your hamburger, and you'll be given food and stuff, but you've got to keep it very quiet because the sound required needed to be very clean. And then, in post production in LA, they usually loop people's voices in, just to keep to make that reality, and they embrace that fully. Um, and then for a scene like the town hall scene that you're just describing, um, I that day I knew that they were going to be more featured than the usual just generic background scene, and I don't know. I guess I just went through my files, and I found the people that by then, because we're in the third season now, I had gotten to know everybody. I knew every one of them by name, and I was able. And sometimes it's like who's available, who can come in that day, and so I think I just ended up picking the people that seemed to be most interesting, and then the ads often would say, "Hey, John, could you move that person over there?" or to the second assistant, to Bob Lozier.
And they were providing their own clothes too, or they got clothes?
They were always requested. They were always told what to wear, what not to wear, and so most of the time the clothes would come in. But then the wardrobe department, Mimi and Nina, would go check them out, and if something was like too fluorescent green or something, they would. They had a whole rack of extras clothes in case extras came in with the wrong thing.
And makeup too. They had hair and makeup had to look at them as well.
They had to look at them just to make sure that we're not doing anything that would call attention to itself. But they didn't get hair and makeup. They were not made up.
No, I'm not saying that.
Yeah, but you're right, Janine. They checked them out when we started out I think it was in the pilot or maybe the second episode. It must have been the second because Josh directed the first one, right? I don't think Josh directed the second one.
No, Josh directed only one.
Right, just the pilot. So I think it was the second one, and I was still learning. I mean, I had never been on a film set before that first day I was on Northern Exposure. So I was.
Where did you come out of the theater in Seattle? That was your background?
Yeah, well, I had come out. I had lived I was a resident director at the Alley Theater in Houston for about 10 years.
Right.
And then I had moved to Seattle, and I was trying to start a career in Seattle, and anyway, I ended up working for Patty Callis, and that's how I got this job. But so there's a request for a Native American. Now, Native Americans can look like you and me. They're called urban Native Americans, where the haircuts are very contemporary, or the more traditional Native Americans, of which Elaine Miles is part, where the men keep their hair long and sometimes wear the traditional clothes. So this director wanted a Native American, and I brought him in, and he goes, "This guy doesn't look Native American." So he went to the makeup trailer. They put on some horrible wig with braids. All that was missing was like a feather, and brought him to the set, and somebody, I forget who, went, "No, no, 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 that's not what we're doing here. That's not," because the show was trying to figure out, it evolved as time went on, just like Elaine's character grew, because they learned that they could give her some more lines, just like Peg Phillips. You mentioned Peg Phillips in this episode. I don't know if you knew this, but Peg just started out as a featured extra to sit behind
Peg, who played Ruth Ann.
Ruth Ann, right? Sorry, Ruth Ann, and she was already I would say almost 70 years old, having just graduated from the University of Washington Theater Department. And she was a featured extra. She might have had a line or two. She went home and wrote longhand pages and pages and pages of her own bio and gave it to the producers down south, Josh and John, and Andy and Diane, I think. They took this thing and they used aspects
I
of
didn't
what she
know
gave them.
that. That's
Yeah, well,
brilliant.
but it's also Peg was damn smart, wasn't she? Because she wanted to be a regular on that show.
Right, but I also think she probably was doing it just because she wanted it to what she was doing to have meaning, and it just shows that if you just invest in what you're doing, it can lead to good things, you know. And what a fascinating! I had no idea about that. I mean, I didn't even know. I thought she was just cast as a regular as Ruth Ann, but she was an extra at first, basically.
She really started out as a featured extra the very first time she was on, but it very quickly evolved because they liked her a lot. They actually had told me what they were looking for was something a little bit more maternal, a more granny type with your little permed white hairdo to sit there. And then I had met Peg, and I thought, well, you should take a look at Peg, and they did, and so that's how Ruth Ann evolved in the show.
It's
But
amazing how much influence you have on the show. You know, it's just amazing. It's I think
oh,
you're
thanks.
unsung for so much of what is great about the show.
But John, it's really fascinating to me to hear these stories because you sort of created the kind of template, the kind of the aspect of the painting that brought the richness and the integral part of the culture and whatnot to the show, and you just did a superb job. Not to mention there were a lot of shows where they had to walk and say go on action, and you choreographed all that in the background. So you had the director for us, but then everybody who might be sitting, and there were a lot of shows where they're walking. Remember that show when John Corbett, everybody wanted to kiss John Corbett. You had a lot of people walking by saying, "Hey, hey, hey, hi, Chris, hi, Chris, hi, Chris."
That's mainly the AD's department, but I think
Yeah, but Rob is correct. I mean, I always delivered the extras, and then the second AD primarily was the one who operated the background. Rarely would a director actually step in unless he was bothered by something or other.
But you were around a lot.
I knew that if I could make myself useful beyond just delivering the numbers of extras they needed, that I would learn a lot. Because again, as I said, I had never been on a film set, and I learned so much about camera acting, about how a show is put together, how a show is shot. And I remember in those first episodes that Bob Scotus, remember that producer at
sure,
the
Robert
beginning?
Scotus.
We were standing in Roslyn, and I was standing next to him, and Bob Lozier and the first AD, whose name I can't remember. This is before Pat McKee and before Jim Charleston, and they were running around trying to make things happen. And Scotus looked at me and says, "Well, help them out." And I went, "Okay." And I went in there and I became their helper.
But that's a great thing. Again, it's the same thing like Peg, and it's a great lesson for people that want to be involved in show business. Learn. It's like be around, get yourself around a set and be helpful, and it could lead to good things.
Yeah, be helpful, learn. Well, I mean, I was terrified the first few episodes that I would do something really stupid because like walk into a scene as it was rolling or something. I was just terrified because it was all so new to me, and just
Right.
even learning stuff like Rob and Janine, you both know it's very distracting to have somebody in your eye line while you're focused on being there and being as real and in the moment as you possibly can. And then suddenly there's a well meaning extra standing on the outskirts looking at the scene where they're taking their focus. And it's just stuff like that these extras embraced. They learned about it. And so they were always very respectful of that.
Let's talk about a little bit about the episode and some of your observations per the background, but also in terms of how the story affected you watching it again, and what you noticed.
So, well, you know, I think you said it in one of the interviews. I forget which one, maybe with Rob or with Josh. But um, northern exposure can affect you in a very, very personal way. So, what I took from this episode is it was all about identity. It was about uh, uh, Fleischman's identity as a Jewish person and how his heritage informs who he is. It was about Darren's identity as a filmmaker that was so challenged, and he, I am a filmmaker. Okay, that's my identity, but it got challenged, and then he managed to break free of that. It was so great. Holling's identity as a horrible, horrible person because of his background, the whole city's identity as a town that embraces their culture and respects their culture, and as opposed to the identity that Maurice was fighting for, which was, putting this frozen Frenchman in some freezer in the middle of Main Street and then sell tickets, creating a much bigger. I mean, that was what Maurice was always about, trying to get, trying to make Sicily, Alaska, a much, much bigger metropolis.
And also, how could he monetize any situation?
Yeah, so I was just moved by all that and how all those three storylines connected up, and yeah, the particularly the ultra orthodox family. Do you want a little story about how we almost lost that family?
Absolutely. Is it? Wait, it's a real family?
I'm gonna. So boy, memory's a weird thing. I think it was, or a combination of a few families. So I got the order. I As time went on, I mostly focused on special things like that, the extras uh, for the Seder, for the Passover dinner that Joel observes with that. What was that great actor's name that played
I was trying to look it
Alan?
up.
Alan
Yeah,
somebody.
Alan, he was so great. And like, he's not on the IMDb, and I remember him from my childhood of watching him. He was just a great actor.
Yeah. So I went out and found them. I forget how I found them, but they were ultra orthodox for real, like really, really real. But I talked him into it and said the show is wonderful and you'll be well represented. And here's the storyline. I always told extras the storyline. So instead of just getting thrown into a scene, they're going, "What the hell's going on here?" They knew the context of what they were doing. It just made it a little richer for them. And so here's this ultra orthodox family. They were the first on the call sheet that day, and I don't know if you remember this, Rob, but they came in at like 5 in the morning to because hair and makeup had to work with them. They didn't dress like that. Joni and Rebecca and Mimi and all of them had to put them together. So they got an extra early call. I got there at 5 in the morning to sort of oversee it. I always hand out the little sides that you get for the scenes, but they weren't prepared because it was too early in the morning and there wasn't an assistant there yet. So I went, oh, screw it. And I got my own script, which I scribble on and write notes on. And I made copies of my script to hand to all of the parents and the children.
It's amazing. I mean, your dedication is so beautiful because it really informed the end product. It's so you went so far to make sure that people understood what they were participating in.
Right. So in this case, you know how a scene ends halfway down a page, and then instead of they start the next scene. The next scene was Maurice and you.
Oh
And
no.
Maurice, he comes in and he's in his bathrobe. And in the production meeting for this whole thing with Sean Markland, he and I were joking around. I said, "What's Maurice doing in his bathrobe?"
Sean Markland was our great prop master the first two
Prop guy.
seasons.
And he said something obscene, and I wrote it down. I'm not going to tell you what he said. I won't do that. But I wrote it down in pencil or in pen on my script, not
Oh
thinking ahead. I
no.
handed this script to the kids, to the children.
Oh no.
The head guy goes up to the director and he shows him this, and he says, "Here, see that? See that there? See that there? If he's going to do that, then we can't be in the show." So they almost walked, and the director calls Rob Thompson over, and I'm walking over, going, "Oh my God!" And I just come clean. I just say, "I am so sorry," and I'm running around getting all the scripts out of the kids' hands, and I'm saying, "I'm so sorry. Please don't go away. That was entirely just an inside thing with me and my colleagues, and it was stupid, and I should never have made a copy of this." And I explained the whole thing, and they stayed. But I don't know how if you knew how close we were to that not
I kind
happening.
of vaguely remember something going on with them, but it was beautifully shot, that scene, and they were all so interesting, and their faces. It was and it's a powerful moment, and Janine was talking about the way, he shot that in such a, it's basically a wide shot with the two of us on each sides of the camera in a kind of closer to the lens, but it's so cinematic, as opposed to the standard kind of television.
Yeah, well, it was not a flashback. It was a dream sequence, and I thought it contributed to that feeling of being a dream sequence.
The wonderful actor that was in it with you, Rob, I was trying to look up his name.
It was Alan something. He was great.
Yeah. And I think Rob, you're a fabulous, wonderful actor. Obviously, the man who played Elijah was John Cullum is, and just the fact. And then we had our little interplay like that at the very end of the show. But I'm not putting myself necessarily in that category of a great actor. But when you have great actors, you can just let the camera sit there, and just let it play on their faces and let the actors do what they do best. And I think sometimes there's so much noise in movie making now, moving cameras, action, cutting back and forth really quickly, that you lose just the storytelling of through the actors and that sense of humanity. And I also want to say that when we're talking about the scope of the show and what was beautiful about the show, there was something that everybody did in the town. They all listened to one another. Everybody had a point of view about it. Well, I want to do this. Well, I want to do this. Well, it's this. Well, and I believe it's this. Well, we shouldn't do that. Well, we shouldn't do this. Nope. Everybody had a town hall. They listened to each other. They grew from it. They didn't shut everybody down. They allowed each other to, like you were talking about the dialectic, which the philosopher Hegel talks about, to kind of have this dialogue that moves everybody in the end to a higher state of enlightenment. And we certainly are lacking that in our society today. And I think that's one of the reasons it's so nice to go to Northern Exposure, because you can just be in this place where people may say weird things and do weird things. But in this particular episode, everyone had their differing point of view, but there was this kind of a synthesis at the end where people.
I just got the actor's name. It was Alan Miller who played
Alan Miller,
Elijah.
Alan
Yeah.
Miller.
I'm glad. I'm glad. Thanks, Rob.
I take your point about everybody listening. There's a room full of many of them Native Americans, and again, this goes to the point of creating such a positive image in our television show that 25 million people see every week about the Native Americans, that they're smart enough to sit in that room and engage in the kind of back and forth that Chris in the Morning is having with Dr. Fleischman, is having with Maurice, and then Peg's interjections are hysterical. They always gave her these kinds of really heady images to interject, and so I thought that was great. And then you talked about the humor. I just wanted to, I mean, a lot of your lines that you wrote, I wrote them too, so I'm not going to repeat them. But when Cynthia, when Shelley comes into your office, plunks her butt down on your exam table and says, "You need to check me out because I think my womb is barren."
Right.
And then you say, "Okay, we bring Holly in, we'll do some testing." Holly, no, no, no. And you say, "Well, we have to check things out." And she says, and I forget exactly how it went, but she says something like, "Oh, Dr. Fleischman, I've been around sperm a lot." who, who else but who else but Shelley in all her innocence, can say a line like that without any other innuendo of what exactly that means. But it's hysterical. It was so funny.
She had another great line where she said, "Oh, well, we've had frozen people in the freezer before," or something like that.
Right.
Like, this isn't our first. Yeah, because,
Right.
and that's true though. When they die in the winter, they can't be buried.
I think Holling says that line, by the way.
Really, I thought it was
Yeah.
Shirley.
No, I think Holling says it.
I would like to ask you about Bill White, who played Dave the cook. And I believe in this show, it might have been his first line because he walks through and has two lines when we're all congregated there, which are always big shots to do, by the way, when you have the entire cast there and you have to get close ups of everybody and whatnot. But he passed away a couple of years ago, and he was really integral to our show. If you would talk a little bit about, it's about time to wrap here, but if you would talk about casting him, and because he was delightful.
Yeah, Bill White was an extra. I remember they said, "Hey, can you pick somebody to be in the kitchen in the back?" So I brought Bill in, and he started. He embraced it totally. And then, like you said, I think this episode might have been the episode where they actually started giving him some lines. I don't know that they ever gave him the status like Elaine or Peg. Um, I think they kept. I don't know about whatever contract they might have had with him, but he was a featured extra.
Well, John, is there anything else you want to, because we're going to wind it up here, is there anything else you want to share before we do?
Okay, so just quickly, you're coming up to the great episode Soulmates.
Uh-huh.
And I'm a stage director. One of the reasons that I had some success in that culture of northern exposure for 5 years is that I was smart enough. I was already 40 years old by the time we started shooting. I was smart enough to keep quiet, look around, not offer too many suggestions, if any at all. But at the end of Soulmates, Marilyn and this troupe of Native Americans do the Raven story, their version of Christmas. I mean, that episode had everybody's version of Christmas. John singing Ave Maria, you making a Christmas tree and giving it to Maggie. I mean, I got emotional watching that. I just checked that out again. The reason I checked it out is I directed that whole sequence, the Soulmate sequence, not the camera work, but they said, okay, here's a rehearsal room. Find the Native American dances. I went to Tillicum Village, which is right across Puget Sound on Blake Island. I don't know if you ever explored Blake Island while during your time in Seattle,
I did. I was
but
there.
they were professional dancers. I brought them in. We rehearsed them. We came up with some choreography. Elaine also had something to say about it, and there it was, all this whole thing that I choreographed, and I just was that was very, very happy time for me. It was very satisfying, and I think that episode won a Peabody Award.
When we cover it, we will definitely give you attribution. And
Yeah,
John, it's just been great to catch up with you. I'm sorry it's so short. We feel like we could go on for hours, but maybe we can get you back again. Down the line. If there's any particular episode that you feel maybe it'd be good for you to come on, let us know.
I'll look ahead. I'll do it. I'll do it. I've had so much fun since Janine first got a hold of me 4 days ago, watching these episodes and watching the interviews. You guys are
Yeah,
great interviewing people and getting them to open. John Corbett hasn't changed a bit.
he's so
You know, you
great.
know, you know. One of the things that the cinematographers complained about with John, this,
It's always moving.
right? They kept saying, "John, we're tight on you. You got to try to stay still."
That's
And I loved
funny.
his story about how he never read the scripts.
Right. Amazing. There's a
Yeah.
great lesson for me in all of John Corbett about that. He's alive, and that's what you see.
He had an innocence about him.
And it becomes incumbent on the show to capture that. So he's just there and we have to capture it. Fascinating. But
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm going to show you this picture. This was Yomi.
oh yeah.
Can you see that? Remember him?
He was one of the shots in Ed's movie.
Yeah. He was in a lot of the episodes. He died during the fourth or fifth season, the New York Times called me and said, "Who is that extra? Can you send me a picture?" I sent
Amazing.
it. This little man who the first day on the set refused to go to the caterer truck because, oh no, I can't do that. Yes, you can. You got to go eat. He never complained. He took care of his mother. And then one day he just up and died. But New York Times, and the title was Yomi Roethlisberger, We Hardly Knew Ye.
I
Why
love
ye?
that. I
New
Mm.
love
York
that.
Times, this guy.
That's amazing.
I just want to say, John, that it's a treat seeing you again. What a joy. You obviously are a consummate professional. You go the extra mile. You just are artistic and intelligent, and you always had a smile on your face. You were always kind and loving. I have the most wonderful memories of you, and I just thank you for joining us today. Excellent stories. I mean, really, really fun behind the scenes today. So it's just wonderful seeing you, and I hope you'll come back.
Well, thank you so much. Listen, because of my unique position as the producer that never had to make decisions that would maybe not make you too happy, I was I always felt such fondness for both of you.
Well, listen, thanks for joining us today for this season 3, episode 5, Body in Question, which is one of our more philosophical, intellectual, poetic shows. And Rob Morrow, always a joy
Thank
seeing
you.
you.
Same
And
here.
we'll see you next week. So we're signing off from O'Connell and Fleischman.
Actually, I think it's probably better it should be Fleischman O'Connell.
In your dreams, Fleischman.
Northern Disclosure is a production with Evergreen Podcasts and executive produced by Paul Anderson and Scott McCarthy for Workhouse Media.